Imagine a world on the brink, a world where the air is thick with tension and the future is uncertain. People go about their daily lives unaware of the storm that is about to break, a world teetering on the edge of a precipice where every decision, every action could tip the balance. The sense of impending doom is palpable, like the calm before a devastating storm. In the summer of 1914, that world existed. It was a time of elegance and progress, yet beneath the surface, dark forces were at play. The streets were filled with the hustle and bustle of everyday life, but shadows loomed large. It was a world of empires, of simmering tensions, and of an arms race spiraling out of control. Nations were locked in a deadly game of one-upmanship, each trying to outdo the other in a show of military might. The drums of war were beating louder and louder. It was a world where a single spark could ignite a conflagration, and ignite it did. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was that spark, setting off a chain reaction that would engulf the world in flames. The unthinkable nightmare had begun. World War I, the Great War, was a cataclysm unlike any other. Trenches stretched for miles, filled with soldiers enduring unimaginable hardships. The landscape was scarred by relentless artillery fire, and the air was thick with the stench of death. It engulfed Europe and spread across the globe, leaving millions dead and forever altering the course of human history. Cities were reduced to rubble, and entire generations were lost. This is their story, a story of unimaginable loss and enduring resilience. This is the story of empires crumbling and new ideologies rising from the ashes. The old world order was shattered, and in its place, new movements and ideas took root. The war was a crucible, forging a new world from the ruins of the old. It is a story of technological innovation used for unspeakable destruction. Tanks rumbled across the battlefield and airplanes soared through the skies, bringing death from above. The war pushed the boundaries of human ingenuity, but at a terrible cost. Most importantly, it is a story of ordinary people caught in the gears of a war they did not choose. Families were torn apart, and lives were irrevocably changed. The human spirit was tested in ways it had never been before, and acts of kindness and bravery shone through the darkness. Their courage, their sacrifice, and their suffering must never be forgotten. The letters they wrote, the memories they left behind, are a testament to their enduring legacy. We remember them not just as soldiers, but as fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. Their story is our story, a reminder of the cost of war and the price of peace. The road to war was paved with many stones, each one a grievance, a rivalry, or a simmering tension. The early 20th century was a time of great change and upheaval in Europe. The continent was a patchwork of powerful empires and emerging nations, each vying for dominance and influence. The political landscape was complex, with alliances and enmities crisscrossing the map. For decades, the great powers of Europe had engaged in a dangerous game of imperial expansion. They sought to extend their reach across the globe, establishing colonies in far-flung lands. This quest for empire was driven by a desire for economic gain, strategic advantage, and national prestige. They carved up Africa and Asia, competing for resources and prestige. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, for instance, saw European powers dividing the African continent with little regard for the indigenous populations. This ruthless scramble for territory led to exploitation and oppression, sowing the seeds of future conflicts. This bred resentment and mistrust, setting the stage for conflict. The rivalries between these imperial powers were not confined to distant lands. They also played out in the corridors of power in Europe. Diplomatic relations were strained, and the balance of power was precarious. Nationalism, the fierce pride in one's nation, also played a critical role. This powerful force was both unifying and divisive. It brought people together under a common identity, but it also fostered a sense of superiority and exclusivity. Nationalistic fervor was often stoked by political leaders and the media, creating an atmosphere of intense patriotism. This fervent patriotism, often manipulated by propaganda, blinded people to the common humanity of their supposed enemies. Propaganda posters and speeches painted rival nations as threats to national security and honor. This dehumanization made it easier for people to support the idea of war. They were taught to see themselves as superior. their rivals as inferior. This mindset was drilled into the populace through education, media, and cultural narratives. It created an us versus them mentality that justified aggression and conflict. Adding fuel to the fire was the relentless militarization of Europe. The major powers were locked in an arms race, each striving to outdo the others in military capability. This build-up of arms was seen as a necessary deterrent, but it also made the prospect of war more likely. Germany, eager to assert its dominance, embarked on a massive naval build-up. The German Kaiser, Wilhelm II, was determined to challenge British naval supremacy. This led to the construction of a formidable fleet of battleships known as dreadnoughts. This alarmed Great Britain, which responded in kind. The British, with their long-standing naval tradition, could not afford to be outmatched. They launched their own naval expansion, leading to a tense and costly arms race on the seas. Soon, all of the major powers were stockpiling weapons and training vast armies. The Industrial Revolution had made it possible to produce weapons on an unprecedented scale. Factories churned out rifles, artillery, and ammunition, while young men were conscripted and trained for battle. They were prepared for war, even eager for it. The idea of a quick and glorious conflict was appealing to many who had no real understanding of the horrors that modern warfare would bring. Military parades and drills fostered a sense of readiness and anticipation. All that was needed was a spark. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in June 1914 provided that spark. This event set off a chain reaction of alliances and hostilities, plunging Europe into the Great War. The intricate web of imperialism, nationalism, and militarism had created a tinderbox, and now it was ablaze. That spark came on a sunny June day in Sarajevo, Bosnia. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting the city with his wife, Sophie. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, a patchwork of different ethnicities and languages, was a powder keg of its own. Nationalist groups eager for independence saw Ferdinand as a symbol of oppression. As the Archduke's motorcade made its way through the crowded streets, a young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip seized his opportunity. He fired 2 shots from his pistol, mortally wounding Ferdinand and Sophie. The assassination sent shockwaves through Europe. Austria-Hungary, outraged and seeking revenge, issued an ultimatum to Serbia, one that Serbia could not possibly accept. The clock was ticking. Section 4. The domino effect. Alliances crumble and nations mobilize. Europe in 1914 was a complex web of alliances, a delicate balance of power that had been carefully constructed over decades. These alliances were meant to provide security and deter any single nation from becoming too powerful. However, they also meant that any conflict had the potential to escalate rapidly, pulling multiple countries into the fray. These agreements, intended to deter aggression, instead acted as a tripwire, dragging one nation after another into the abyss. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary set off a chain reaction. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and the intricate web of alliances began to unravel. Germany, bound by treaty to Austria-Hungary, pledged its unwavering support. The German Empire saw this as an opportunity to assert its dominance in Europe and was eager to back its ally. The German military began to mobilize, preparing for a conflict that would soon engulf the continent. Russia, feeling a kinship with Serbia and determined to protect Slavic interests, began to mobilize its massive army. The Russian Empire's vast resources and manpower were now being directed towards a war effort that would strain its economy and society to the breaking point. Germany, fearing a war on 2 fronts against both Russia and France, decided on a risky gamble, the Schlieffen Plan. This plan called for a rapid invasion of France through Belgium, aiming to quickly defeat the French before turning east to face the slower mobilizing Russian forces. This audacious military strategy called for a lightning strike through neutral Belgium to knock France out of the war before Russia could fully mobilize, but the plan backfired. The invasion of Belgium brought Britain into the war, as it had guaranteed Belgian neutrality. The small but determined Belgian army resisted fiercely, buying precious time for the French and British to prepare their defenses. Belgium's resistance allowed the French and British forces to dig in and establish defensive positions. The initial German advance was halted, and what was expected to be a quick and decisive campaign turned into a prolonged and grueling conflict. Trenches were dug, and both sides settled into a war of attrition. The war that was supposed to be over in weeks would drag on for years. The Western Front became a brutal stalemate, with neither side able to gain a significant advantage. The horrors of trench warfare, with its mud, blood, and relentless artillery barrages, would come to define the conflict. The world watched in horror as the great powers of Europe tore themselves apart, and the true cost of these alliances became tragically clear. Section 5. A gruesome stalemate, life and death in the trenches. On the Western Front, the war settled into a brutal stalemate. Millions of men faced each other across a desolate landscape of mud, barbed wire, and death. The trenches, stretching for hundreds of miles, became a nightmarish world of their own. Soldiers endured unimaginable conditions, living in constant fear of artillery bombardments, sniper fire, and poison gas attacks. Rats, lice, and disease were constant companions. Major battles like Verdun and the Somme became synonymous with unimaginable carnage. Hundreds of thousands of men were slaughtered for the sake of yards of mud. The human cost of the war was becoming too horrific to comprehend.